What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved character actors sits down for what should be a routine late-night talk show interview, only to find himself in the crosshairs of a host determined to make him the punchline? Tonight, we're diving into the shocking confrontation that left John C. Reilly walking off set, the audience stunned into silence, and a television host's reputation hanging by a thread. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is the story of how arrogance and cruelty can destroy years of goodwill in a matter of minutes. If you want to see how badly this can go, make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below, because what you're about to hear will change how you see late-night television forever. The green room at the Ed Sullivan Theatre buzzed with the usual pre-show energy. John C. Reilly sat quietly in the corner, his weathered hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The veteran actor, known for his earnest performances in films ranging from dramatic masterpieces to beloved comedies, had done hundreds of these interviews over his decades-long career. Tonight felt different, though. There was something in the air, a tension that seemed to emanate from the production staff as they hurried past his door with worried expressions. Stephen Colbert had built his reputation on sharp wit and political commentary. But lately the ratings had been slipping. Network executives were breathing down his neck, demanding more viral moments, more controversy, more of anything that would get people talking on social media the next morning. The pressure was mounting, and everyone could feel it. "Mr. Reilly, we're ready for you," a young production assistant said, her voice betraying a nervousness that seemed out of place for such a routine task. As John stood and straightened his jacket, he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. At 60, he carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who had earned his place in Hollywood through talent and hard work rather than scandal or self-promotion. The walk to the stage felt longer than usual. The familiar sounds of the audience chattering and the band warming up should have been comforting, but instead they felt ominous. John had appeared on the show twice before, both times having pleasant, light-hearted conversations about his latest projects. There was no reason to expect tonight would be any different. As he settled into the guest chair, the studio lights felt hotter than normal. Colbert finished his opening monologue to enthusiastic applause, then turned toward his guest, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The audience applauded warmly as John waved, their genuine affection for the actor palpable in the room. "So, John, great to have you back," Colbert began, his voice carrying that familiar late-night host cadence. "You know, I was looking at your filmography earlier today, and I have to ask, how does it feel to be Hollywood's go-to guy for, well, let's call them interesting character choices?" The question caught John off guard. There was something in the phrasing, a subtle condescension that made his smile falter slightly. "Well, Stephen, I've been fortunate to work with incredible directors who've trusted me with roles that challenge both me and audiences. Whether it's dramatic work or comedy, I try to bring honesty to every character." "Honesty," Colbert repeated, leaning back in his chair with an expression that suggested he found the word amusing. "That's interesting, because I was watching some of your recent work, and I couldn't help but notice a pattern. You seem to specialize in playing. How should I put this delicately, losers?" The audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the playful ribbing that was standard for late-night television. There was a mean-spirited edge to it that felt wrong. John's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained steady. "I think that's a rather reductive way to look at it, Stephen. These characters are human beings with complex motivations and real struggles. Just because someone faces challenges doesn't make them a loser." "Oh, come on," Colbert said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Let's be honest. Here, you've made a career out of playing the sad sack, the bumbling fool, the guy who can't get his life together. I mean, your character in Step Brothers is literally a 40-year-old man who lives with his parents and throws tantrums like a toddler. That's not complexity, that's just pathetic. The audience was dead silent now. Even the band members looked uncomfortable, glancing at each other with expressions of disbelief. This was supposed to be a promotional interview for John's latest film, not a personal attack on his career choices. John leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on a firmer tone. I think you're missing the point of what those films are trying to say. Comedy often comes from pain, from recognizing our own flaws and failures in characters who maybe take them to an extreme. There's humanity in that. There's truth in showing that adults can still feel lost or confused or hurt. Truth? Colbert's laugh was sharp and ugly. The truth is, you've been playing the same character for 20 years. The bumbling man-child who somehow stumbles through life despite being completely incompetent. It's like watching a car accident, in slow motion, except the car never actually crashes. It just keeps sputtering along, embarrassing everyone who has to watch. The color drained from John's face, but he maintained his composure with the professionalism of someone who had spent decades in an industry that could be both cruel and unpredictable. The audience was no longer just uncomfortable. They were actively upset. Murmurs of disapproval rippled through the crowd, and someone in the back actually called out, "That's not cool, man." But Colbert seemed energized by the controversy, as if the negative reaction was exactly what he had been hoping for. "Stephen, I'm not sure what's gotten into you tonight," John said, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of warning. "But I came here to talk about my new film and have a pleasant conversation with your audience. If you want to discuss my work, let's do that respectfully." Respectfully? Colbert's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. You want respect? For what? Exactly. For taking roles that any community theater actor could handle? For being Hollywood's safety net when they need someone to play the lovable loser who makes everyone else feel better about their own lives? The band leader, John Batiste, was visibly cringing behind his piano. The cameras kept rolling, but several crew members were looking toward the control booth with expressions that clearly asked whether they should cut to commercial. The show's producers were frantically whispering into their headsets, but Colbert was beyond their control now. John's hands gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles whitening. "You know what, Stephen? I've been in this business long enough to recognize when someone is trying to manufacture a moment at my expense. I've worked with directors like Paul Thomas Anderson, the Coen brothers, Martin Scorsese. These aren't people who hire safety nets or community theater actors. They hire professionals who can bring depth and authenticity to complex roles." "Oh, please," Colbert scoffed, rolling his eyes dramatically. Name-dropping directors doesn't change the fact that you're essentially a character actor who got lucky. You think because you were in a few prestige films that somehow elevates the dozens of mediocre comedies where you play the same bumbling fool. Magnolia was 25 years ago, John. What have you done lately besides cash checks for playing overgrown children? The audience was now actively booing. Not playful boos, but genuine expressions of disgust at what they were witnessing. Several people were getting up and leaving, shaking their heads in disappointment. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was a public humiliation disguised as an interview. John stood up slowly, his full height imposing despite his generally gentle demeanor. "I think we're done here," he said quietly, but his voice carried clearly through the studio. "I came here as a guest, with respect for you and your show, but I won't sit here and be insulted for the sake of whatever ratings grab you think this is." But Colbert wasn't finished. As John began to remove his microphone, the host leaned forward with a predatory smile. "Oh, you're leaving. How perfectly on brand. When things get a little tough, when someone asks you to defend your choices, you just walk away. Just like your characters do. Just like you've been doing your whole career, hiding behind quirky voices and goofy facial expressions instead of actually having to act." The words hit John like a physical blow. His hand froze on the microphone clip, and for a moment the entire studio held its breath. This had crossed every line of professional courtesy and basic human decency. Even the most cynical late-night television veterans watching from home would later say they had never seen anything so unnecessarily cruel. You want to know about acting? John's voice was no longer quiet. It filled the studio with a power that reminded everyone present that this was a man who had commanded stages and screens for decades. Acting is about empathy, Stephen. It's about finding the humanity in every character, no matter how flawed or struggling they might be. It's about helping audiences connect with parts of themselves they might not want to acknowledge. You clearly wouldn't understand that, because what you're doing right now isn't entertainment. It's bullying. And I won't be part of it. Colbert's smile faltered for just a moment, but his ego was too invested now to back down. Bullying? I'm asking legitimate questions about your career trajectory. If you can't handle a little honest criticism, maybe you should stick to children's movies where nobody expects actual depth or range. Honest criticism? John laughed, but there was no humor in it. There's nothing honest about this ambush. You invited me here under false pretenses, then decided to use me as a punching bag to generate controversy. That's not journalism. That's not entertainment. That's just sad. And the saddest part is that you're hurting your own audience in the process. These people came here expecting to have a good time, to maybe learn something about movies or hear a funny story. Instead, you're forcing them to watch you tear down someone they respect for no reason other than your own insecurity. The audience erupted in applause at this, finally given permission to express their support for John and their disapproval of what was happening. The sound was thunderous, and it went on for nearly a full minute. Colbert's face was flushed now, his carefully constructed television persona cracking under the pressure of universal condemnation. Insecurity? He shot back, his voice rising to be heard over the continuing applause. I'm insecure. You're the one who's built an entire career on making people feel sorry for you. Every role you take is just another variation of poor little boo. John, he tries so hard, but nothing ever works out. It's pathetic, and frankly, it's getting old. John had finished removing his microphone and was preparing to leave, but this last comment stopped him cold. He turned back to face Colbert, and the camera caught something in his expression that no one in that studio would ever forget. It wasn't anger exactly, though that was certainly there. It was disappointment so profound it seemed to age him 10 years in the span of a heartbeat. You know what's really pathetic, Stephen, he said, his voice now deadly calm. Using your platform to attack someone who can't fight back on equal terms. I'm a guest on your show, in your house, playing by your rules. You have all the power here, all the control, and you're using it to be cruel. That says nothing about me and everything about you. The studio was completely silent now, except for the hum of the cameras and lights. Even the crew members had stopped, their usual background movement to watch this unprecedented confrontation unfold. Colbert opened his mouth to respond, but John held up a hand to stop him. I've been doing this for 40 years, John continued. I've worked with brilliant people and difficult people, generous people and selfish people. But I've never encountered someone who seemed so determined to tear another person down for entertainment. You're better than this, Stephen. At least, I thought you were. The weight of John's words hung in the air, like a physical presence. For the first time since the interview began, Colbert seemed genuinely rattled. His carefully maintained television persona was cracking, revealing something ugly underneath. But instead of backing down or apologizing, he doubled down with the desperation of someone who knew he had gone too far but couldn't find a way back. Don't you dare lecture me about entertainment, Colbert snapped, his voice losing its polished television quality and becoming sharp and personal. You think because you've been around forever, that gives you some kind of moral authority? You're a relic, John. A leftover from an era when audiences were satisfied with mediocrity wrapped in false sincerity. Modern audiences want authenticity. They want real talk, not some sanitized publicity tour where everyone pretends your latest movie isn't just another paycheck. John shook his head slowly, the disappointment in his eyes deepening. This isn't authenticity, Stephen. This is cruelty masquerading as honesty. There's a difference between asking tough questions and what you're doing here tonight. You're not challenging me professionally, you're trying to humiliate me personally, and I genuinely don't understand why. The audience was completely on John's side now. Someone shouted, "Leave him alone!" from the upper balcony, and others were nodding in agreement. The energy in the room had shifted so dramatically that even the most oblivious observer could feel the hostility directed at the host. But Colbert seemed blind to it all, consumed by whatever demon was driving him to continue this assault. Humiliate you? Colbert's laugh was bitter and harsh. You've been humiliating yourself for decades. Do you know what people in this industry really say about you? They call you reliable, dependable, safe. Those aren't compliments, John. Those are the words people use when they can't think of anything actually impressive to say about your work. Stephen, stop. John's voice carried a note of genuine concern now, as if he was watching someone self-destruct in real time. You're destroying yourself here. Whatever you think you're accomplishing, it's not worth it. Your audience deserves better than this. And honestly, so do you. But Colbert was beyond reason now, his ego wounded by the audience's obvious rejection of his behavior. Don't pretend to care about me or my audience. You're just upset because someone finally had the courage to say what everyone's been thinking. You're a has-been who never really was. A character actor who convinced himself he was a leading man, when really you're just the guy directors call when they need someone to play pathetic convincingly. The cruelty of the words seemed to shock even Colbert himself. For a brief moment, his mask slipped entirely, and everyone could see the regret flash across his face. But it was too late. The damage was done, and there was no taking back what had been said. John stood completely still for a long moment, processing not just the words but the venom behind them. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but carried to every corner of the studio. I feel sorry for you, Stephen. I really do. Whatever happened to make you think this was acceptable, whatever pressure you're under, whatever insecurities are driving this behavior, I hope you find a way to deal with them. Because this person you're being right now, this isn't who you are. At least, I hope it isn't. Don't you dare psychoanalyze me. Colbert shot back, but his voice lacked the conviction it had carried earlier. You don't know anything about me, or what I'm dealing with. You're just another Hollywood has-been who thinks everyone owes him respect he hasn't earned. I'm not asking for respect I haven't earned, John replied, his composure remarkable given the circumstances. I'm asking for basic human decency. The same thing I'd ask for if we met on the street, or in a restaurant, or anywhere else civilized. People interact. This isn't about Hollywood or careers or any of that. This is about how we treat each other as human beings. The audience began to applaud again, but John gestured for them to stop. Don't applaud me for asking for the bare minimum, he said, addressing them directly for the first time. You all came here tonight expecting to be entertained, to maybe laugh a little, to hear some stories about movies. Instead, you're being forced to witness something that should never happen in a civilized society. That's not fair to any of us, Colbert's face was red now, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped his note cards. You're being dramatic, John. This is just television. This is what people tune in for. They want to see real reactions, real emotions, not some scripted publicity appearance where everyone pretends to be best friends. Real emotions. John's voice rose slightly, the first crack in his composure. You want to see real emotions? I'm heartbroken, Stephen. Not for myself, but for you. I'm heartbroken that someone with your talent and platform chose to use it this way. I'm heartbroken for your audience, who trusted you to give them something worthwhile, and instead got this display of petty cruelty. And I'm heartbroken for everyone who works on this show, who are now associated with behavior that goes against everything good entertainment should represent. The studio was dead silent except for the sound of someone in the audience quietly crying. Even the crew members were visibly emotional, some wiping their eyes, others staring at the floor in embarrassment. This had gone so far beyond entertainment, into something genuinely painful to witness. Colbert made one final desperate attempt to regain control. You're overreacting to a simple interview. If you can't handle a few tough questions, maybe you shouldn't be in show business. John turned to face him one last time, and his expression was one of profound sadness mixed with unmistakable dignity. These weren't tough questions, Stephen. Tough questions challenge you to think, to defend your choices, to explain your craft. What you did tonight was just mean. And the tragedy is that you're talented enough that you didn't need to resort to this. You could have had a great interview, your audience could have had a wonderful time, and we both could have walked away feeling good about what we accomplished. Instead, you chose this. I hope someday you understand what you threw away. With that, John C. Reilly walked off the stage, leaving Stephen Colbert sitting alone at his desk, facing an audience that was staring at him with a mixture of shock, disappointment, and disgust. The cameras kept rolling, but there was nothing left to capture except the aftermath of a complete professional and personal breakdown. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, until finally someone in the audience stood up and began to leave. Then another. Then another. Soon, entire rows were emptying as people filed out of the studio, many of them shaking their heads or speaking in hushed, disgusted tones. Colbert sat frozen, apparently unable to process what had just happened or how to respond. The show would eventually cut to commercial, but the damage was done. In the space of 20 minutes, he had destroyed years of goodwill, alienated his audience, and revealed something about himself that could never be unseen. And that's how one of Hollywood's most respected actors ended up walking off one of television's biggest stages, leaving behind a host who had forgotten the most basic rule of entertainment: that cruelty is never funny and that real strength comes from lifting people up, not tearing them down. What did you think of Stephen Colbert's behavior that night? Was there any excuse for what happened, or did he cross a line that should never be crossed? Subscribe for more stories like this, and let me know in the comments what you think really drove him to attack John C. Reilly so viciously.